Okay, so this afternoon we're going to start working on our clay. I suggest that you do this outside. It is messy. Wear your old clothes, old shoes, because the clay tends to splash all over and get all over everything. So I have dumped my mica clay that I dug into a bucket. And I have found some things in there that I thought might be interesting. This is a piece of quartz, and here's a piece of mica, and some roots. And I wanted to say that the way you find micaceous clay is that you'll find a place that has mica and has quartz. This is a piece of rose quartz that came out of this clay. I'm not sure if you can see these little tiny pieces of mica, how they sparkle. And the way you find a place that has clay is to look for this kind of landscape, where the clay has gotten wet and cracked in a pattern, like a spider web type of pattern. This is where, here's another picture of something like that. Where this clay comes from, it's more in the mountains, right out of the ground. This is sort of on top of the ground because it's been carried by water to where it was. But you can probably find clay along most ditch banks, along the Rio Grande. You might find it right in your backyard. If you see that kind of a pattern on the ground and the ground is slippery when it's wet, then you've got clay. So I'm going to take my bucket and I'm going to pour some water in here. Now, in Felipe's handout, he talks about how they used to process the clay. They would take a small cup and they would put some clay in the water, and everything that was heavy, like rocks or anything that was solid, would go to the bottom, and anything that was organic, like this, would float to the top. And if you can see that happening here, all of these roots and grass and organic material is floating to the top. I'm going to just put it in here. Getting rid of this stuff first helps you to sieve it so that you don't get a lot of stuff blocking up the sieve. Here's a nice piece of mica. Here's another one. So clay is formed over the centuries by rock that has decomposed. So if we left this for centuries more, this would eventually turn into clay. It's what's called feldspar or granite, and it's affected over the years by wind, by rain, by erosion, by rivers running and carrying it to different places. So the original clay, primary clay, was porcelain. And porcelain is a white clay. And when it gets carried by erosion, it picks up all kinds of impurities along the way. Porcelain has a very high melting point because it's high fire clay. It's porcelain clay. But when it starts to pick up iron and manganese and copper and all kinds of impurities that it picks up along the way as it travels from where it was formed to where it's eventually going to end up, then those impurities tend to lower the melting temperature of that clay. So micaceous clay has a very, very low melting temperature. It's even lower than the commercial clay. The commercial clay that we're going to use actually is like an earthenware or a terracotta. This is even lower than that. More mica rocks. If it doesn't want to break up, it's probably a rock or a piece of mica. There's more. You never know what you're going to find in here, so you might want to wear gloves if you're squeamish about getting your hands dirty. You want to get as much of the clay off of the rocks and everything that you can, because the clay is kind of precious. So when you go to dig clay, I'll never forget the first time Felipe took us up on the mountain to dig clay. And we sat down and he said a prayer to Mother Earth to thank her for allowing us to take clay from her belly and use it to participate in the creation of Mother Earth. And he said his Apache prayer, and we were all sitting there, and all of a sudden the wind just kind of picked up and rustled through the pine trees, and everybody was quiet, and it was just a very, very special moment. And it made me realize how sacred the clay is. We just ordinarily buy it from the store, and we have no sense of where it comes from or how important it is in nature. The earth, it really is our mother. Okay, so I've gotten most of the stuff out of here. Although I still feel lots down here in the bottom. Okay, so our next step is to take the other bucket, and I'm going to use a sieve. You can use whatever you have. If you have a window screen, you can put it on top of a big bucket. And then I'm going to pour it through. Let's get rid of some of this. More roots. So now this is the thicker part. I took off my rings, and it's always a good idea to do that because this clay is very, very hard, and it sometimes gets into the cracks of your rings and it's hard to get it out. So if I work with the micaceous clay, I usually rid myself of my jewelry. Okay, so you don't have to watch me sit and sieve all of this clay. I'm going to sit this down. And then I'm going to rinse out my bucket. Okay, and then I am going to take a piece of cloth. This could be anything. It could be a piece of a sheet. Just should be thin cloth. And I'm going to pour my clay in there. You can see it already started to settle. Okay, so you can either leave it in here or you can take it outside, dig a hole, just a shallow hole, and lay your cloth in there so your water seeps into the ground underneath, and it will leave the clay sitting. You can see that it's already starting to thicken up and attach to the cloth. Once that's done, once you can peel it away from the cloth, you can just take it and knead it, put it in a plastic bag, and it'll be ready for you to start working with. So, if you're ready to get your hands dirty, this is really fun.